Wait on
property, land,
a few board members, but we will go ahead and get started. Thank you, and excuse me, you're up first. And you have your handouts for those of you. Tanya is joining us this afternoon for our follow-up on our superintendent leadership profile. Definitely everybody at the table, but the rest of you who may have stayed to join us at our last open session may remember it was at the end of our board meeting when we were actually creating the profile. So we had several board members who were interested in coming back to see the entire culmination here. It's also in their assembly, right, so they can actually also access this electronically if you haven't already. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it already, I will open with asking you to just take a glance at it before we begin to discuss it to see, just to refresh your memory on where we were at our last meeting and some of our thoughts. Then we'll turn it over to you to see if there's any feedback, process, thoughts that you want to share with us. And then we also had a question that I mentioned to Allison, so I'm not sure if you've been able to collect data or request from processes from other large district or comparable size districts.
Yes, those are posted on the assembly as well.
That's on the school board assembly.
Right, it's a different assembly, yeah.
On the superintendent's assembly you go to.
Only the one we can see.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what's the hiccup.
But this document's on our school board assembly.
No, not yet.
No.
It is not.
Oh, okay. It's heading that way. All right.
I should have checked.
Yeah. No, I didn't actually ask Melissa to put it there because we actually all have access to it.
I think
And apparently we are live today. We're back. I don't see Mr. Simmons, but it looks like we're back up and running.
Yeah, thank you. We've been down. Okay.
Yes, we have been. Ms. Hartenstein.
All right, so when I look at what we've done so far, it reads to me like a draft, not like a sophisticated document that has the right language in it. So I feel like there's some work to be done on that. Of course, we have, when we look at diverse populations, there's a lot more that we want to say. So if you had a chance to look at the Houston Independent School District, their one-pager, I thought I could take and literally put Wake County Public Schools. The language in it sort of encapsulates what we have here. Because we talk a lot about how we wanted our superintendent to be visible, we wanted them in our schools, but to say we want them in all of our schools, the reality of running a district this size does not mean that you can spend portions of your every week actually being in schools. But being accessible is, I think, more of the key. And that when there are things that do happen, that we want a superintendent that's going to respond when those things when we need to. So their first bullet, being visible, accessible, and communicating regularly and systematically with all communities, because we've talked about how we want them not just in our schools or with us, but also with all of our families, by both sharing information and genuinely seeking input. I love the word genuinely seeking, because you can say, oh yeah, we've got input, but I love having that part of being really deliberate about, yes, I really want your input. I want to hear it. Before decisions are made, while at the same time being a decisive leader. Because just because you hear what people and you're listening to what they say doesn't mean that you are going to just, oh, okay, that's what we're going to do. I mean, looking at all of the parameters. So the language in this I just thought was excellent in many, many areas. And that's just one example.
Is everybody able to get to that? I just, okay.
You should on somebody.
Yeah, I've got it. I just wanted to make sure that everybody's.
Yep, thank you for checking. I think they called and let everybody know that our stuff will be uploaded next week. Any other feedback? Debbie? I appreciate you pointing out some very pointed language, which also sounds like language we heard in our questionnaires.
Yes.
And the feedback that we received.
Well, I concur with your thoughts that this feels very draft-like.
I don't know. I
think that's what it is.
It is. She was like, these are your words.
Yes, that's what I said. I was like, oh gosh, this is just, I said that, but there's a whole better way to say that.
Flip chart debrief.
Yes.
Right.
Are we drafting a document that goes public, or is this a document for internal use? I mean, that I think is a question that I have, and that tells us me to a degree how much work we put into wordsmithing. Because if it's just for internal use for us to say, hey, these were our ideas, are we aligned, are we consistent? I don't need to feel like we have to do a lot of wordsmithing to polish it up. If it's a public document, then we want it to look professional.
Everything we do is a public document.
No, but you understand what I'm saying.
You mean the utility of it.
So I think
or
it
we
should be
actually
polished.
using it to share.
I think it should
The
be
purpose isn't for it to be sent out to potential candidates. I mean, obviously the applications are closed. It's more so that when we sit down and you're deciding the questions that you want to ask, and as a board when you're discussing like who may you want to interview and who you may want to move on to the finals, you can kind of look at this and say, we had this point here, but it's not a consensus document even. I mean, there's items on here that particular board members may not agree with, so it's just kind of an overview just to kind of get your thoughts down on paper. So, I mean, to answer your question, I wouldn't think it would be a lot of wordsmithing. I think that the Houston piece was designed for
it's a
the outfit.
document.
Because,
That's a great point.
So when we do our, we're looking at our applications, our resumes, and all those documents, and there's a chart, like, give it a rubric, thank you, to look at. When we do that work ourselves, does that become public?
No, it does not.
Say that one more time.
Yes, I'm reviewing an applicant,
Right.
and I have a list of criteria that I'm looking for.
Right.
Trying to say, no, I don't see that there. No, I don't see that. Do I have that, basically my notes on whatever format, does that become public?
Right. If it's notes regarding particular candidates, then it is absolutely not public.
Not, okay.
In some, you're not required to use it. It's just a tool that you can use if you find it helpful.
So your point is the goal was not to have us go through this for a forward-facing document. The goal was for our internal use when we're actually looking at potential candidates.
Yes.
Perfect.
So this is literally the page when we say we need to be on the same page.
Well,
right?
that's not what you're saying. No, this is literally the page of our words.
Right.
Yes,
That's the only thing we say.
Really.
It's literally our words.
Yeah.
So I guess that can be a question, Ms. Kushner, Ms. Hartenstein, clearly we have the option to make it a forward-facing document. That was not the intention of the process.
Okay.
Gives you some clarity.
And what we find is it can be limiting for a board that when you get in, people don't hear the interviews, they don't see the references in the background. So if they're looking at this forward-facing document and then you hire someone, they're going to be like, well, wait a minute.
Where's check 1, 2, 3,
And so you can't check people into boxes.
Right.
So it's just to kind of get on the same page, just kind of put your thoughts out there and kind of what you're looking for and the trigger for your other board members. Like if something's important to you, it just to kind of put it out there so that your fellow board members can consider it. They don't have to agree with it, but because you're all duly elected officials, and you're tasked with voting your conscience and your own mind. So we don't want to limit that in any way.
That's a good opposite side of the coin perspective of why not to do a forward-facing. Just for people thinking about what our choices are here is, that's true. For me, if it's forward-facing, then that becomes an accountability tool.
But it's helpful, and we do, when the folks call us, and they generally will ask for your survey results and the leadership profile, and we provide that to them, but it's just, they would be in error if they just looked at this and be like, okay, if I check all these, then the Wake County Board is going to elect me. But it just kind of gives them an idea of, to maybe be aware of valuing employees. That's a concern for a board member, but that's part of the job of superintendent, which God bless you. But it's part of their job is to understand how to navigate and meet the needs of all of the board members.
So did I hear you, this document, this leadership profile, would normally go to the candidates?
If they ask for it. I mean, they don't always ask for it, but if they do, I mean, it's obviously public. I mean, it's a public document. So if they do ask for it, we would share it with them. But with the understanding, and they understand what the document is, that it's not, a checklist of who the next Wake County superintendent is going to be, but the boards stating, individual board members stating in a relaxed format. I mean, because it's not all agreed on. And we make that very clear to them that this is not something that the board got together and voted and said, this is who we as a board want. It's just various thoughts and qualifications and characteristics that individual board members stated that they were interested in after hearing the stakeholder input and possibly talking with each other. I mean, I think that's part of this dynamic process.
It's interesting because, there's the two ways to do it. There's the upfront to think about what we would like, which is the sort of the public process you're going through. Then there's the other way of looking at all of the candidates and extrapolating from that, what is it that we think is most desirable, And it's sort of the two different types of reasoning. The second would be sort of closed session because you'd be looking at specific candidates. But I know that you all are pondering the notion of, you want genuine responses from candidates and you would trust that, but to what extent is it impacted by sending them a profile of this is what we want, right?
Well, it's not we. I mean, I think that's what we make that very clear, that it's not what the board wants. These are characteristics that an individual board member stated. So that may be that 3 agree with that and 6 don't. But they need to be aware of kind of what they're going to have to deal with that when they're sitting in the chair, like different board members having different areas of concern and more or less. So it's kind of different. And the biggest piece of it is really what I've seen the most useful is when you're deciding what questions you want to ask and what areas are of concern. You can kind of see trends in here, and it will help us make sure that we're covering these areas in the question process.
Ms. Cushman?
Well, I do have a question just for colleagues as to the last bullet underneath the box about, and I guess our attorney added that these are the areas that we had evaluated our past superintendent on. So did we want that captured anywhere above the line?
Thank you. Just I'd like to elaborate a second. I mean, I was just raising that as just a reminder of that's how if board members had an interest, then that's fine. I wasn't pushing it.
Because it's different than the
North Carolina school rubric. Exactly. It's what was your local sort of, these were your topic areas. So
I don't know if that's what we want to discuss that this afternoon or just to take a look at.
If you'd like to discuss it, let's discuss it.
Today's the day.
That's right.
Today's the day.
That's right.
Well, I would like to see these things captured somehow, and many of them probably are. The personal qualities that are in that box.
But we don't have in here a piece about, which is something I definitely want to see, is the experience with managing complex budgets and finance and how to effectively use limited resources, because it doesn't matter what district the candidates will be coming from. That is an issue everywhere. So how?
And board relations. I mean, that is, you all, the superintendent's answerable to the board, and that it's hard not to include that as a part of what you have an interest in.
Yes. The degree in the 4th bullet under leadership and management has demonstrated success and growth in funding given budgetary constraints.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear you actually looking for more than that, but I think it's the 4th bullet under leadership and management.
Oh, okay.
So, given the nature of this document, I actually see some value in having this statement tacked on at the end that says, hey, these are how it was done, recently done, because if these are really just bullet points from individual board members, which they largely are, then this is sort of a summative. Yeah. This is how you're going to be evaluated. As much as anything, this is an FYI document, not a directive document. It's just a sort of lay of the land. It would strike me that if this is where we land, as opposed to, and I too, from just glancing through it, like the Houston thing, But I think it'd be wise to have a paragraph sort of at the beginning, sort of explaining the context of this, rather than, right, if this just was handed to me, I'm going to read it one way. If it is, these were issues raised of concern by board members, I'm going to read it a different way.
To highlight that, I mean, a lot of, I know many of us, when we were reading through the community feedback, these were the trends that we saw as well, right? So it's not just my concerns as Lindsay, but what I extrapolated based from what I read from the community survey responses. Because I'd like to acknowledge that the people of Wake County have that input as well, because I think that's important.
And it's important for us to ask those questions.
Absolutely.
Because there was a lot of agreement between community and staff and board on what really, when you look at the top 5 to 7 concerns, that we would have questions within our interview process that would capture their thoughts.
And even though we, highlighted, but I just want to make sure that whoever is looking at this, if they're applying and they do their work and come to this document, that they know it wasn't just the 9 of us who came up with these words, but it was based off of feedback that we got from the community at large, both the community and staff.
That's true.
I think that's a great idea. The introductory explanatory paragraph. I think that would be useful.
In perpetuity.
You could, I don't know if you like the word leadership profile. If that's too strong when you're talking about just comments. If you wanted to say Wake County Board of Education at the top, superintendent search, and then you could just say working document, community feedback, and board member comments. Just working document, community feedback, and board member comments, and then kind of go from there. So it has a little bit. It's less of a profile, like we're stamping this as everything.
Profile does sound a little basic. That's a good point.
Is the board in agreement with that?
Thoughts, comments?
Change to
I can't tell.
I like that.
I do too.
Thanks.
And then I don't feel like we have to do so much wordsmithing.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Right. This is a working document.
I was already feeling like that when you were like, oh, it's not a forward-facing document. I was like, great, we're not going to sit here and wordsmith this.
And how would you phrase that? Right.
It was working, I had working document, community feedback, and board member comments. It's not even saying that it's necessarily all board members agree on all of it, and you're taking into account, I think Lindsay's good point, that community feedback. It's working document, so that takes you away from the exactitude standard.
I just don't think we needed to spend an hour on how to rephrase rock the boat.
Thank you.
Man.
Well, as I shared with Dr. Burns, who he and I are both sailors, there are only 2 boats that don't rock. Only 2 kinds of boats that don't rock. They're either on the hard or on the bottom. The boat is in the water, it will rock. I want to be on a rocking boat.
I'm like expecting
Sounds like you want to wordsmith that phrase then.
Well, I would can then, but we don't have to.
Sounds like you already put a little work into it. So perhaps that's what we want to say. We want to be.
Yes.
We want a rocking boat.
I just had the song going through my head.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. So, any other feedback, comments?
Thanks for that.
Love this song. That's what I'm here for.
Ms. Hartstein, while we're not wordsmithing this, I am curious. You pointed out some very specific pieces from Houston, so I want to circle back. And I actually, to your point, like the word use that they had that you read aloud. So I just want to check back to see if there are any specific things that we want to go back and add from the comments you made.
So far with that,
we don't have to, but I'm just checking.
I have bullet 1 from the Houston document from her comments from before, but if there's...
Oh, I could go on. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, now that I have a better understanding of how we're actually going to use this, it gives me more freedom, I think, as I look at the applicants.
fair to acknowledge that even though where it says experience with diverse populations only has one bullet point, there are characteristics in curriculum and instruction, talking about social emotional skills, restorative practices, that can kind of go through different pieces. But I also understand that only seeing one bullet point there makes it seem like it's really not our first, right?
Yeah.
Where are you on the document?
The experience with diverse population.
You could take the major headlines out.
Yeah.
It's not departmentalized. It's everything we do.
It's part of that whole child, whole superintendent approach.
Whole board, whole teacher.
Whole team. All for the child. Anything else?
I think Ms. Cashwood, did you have a conversation with her because she wasn't able to be here?
I did. Well, she sent me a few things because I reminded her we were discussing these.
I'd like to add under the diverse population, we tend to think of our diversity in population, particularly academically. We spend a lot of time on our low-performing students and how are we going to close the gap, which is incredibly important. We don't want to lose any of that work. But I would like to see us see a candidate who has some experiences with advanced students, our gifted students, and because we talk a lot about innovation, I'm very interested in someone who may have some new ideas, some innovation. It doesn't cost any money. But how we might better serve our gifted students. So I'd like that as a separate part of the diverse population. And I think Ms. Cash would, because we've talked about that a lot.
Thank you for reminding me. She listed good, similar district, good results around funding, community relations, and to be familiar with growth, which I can revisit and see if that one's on there. So I think Tanya got that bullet, Mrs. Hartenstein to add. And then
Growth is a little bit with the budget.
yeah, it's a little bit there. And she's not here, so I won't guess, but I could also see growth going under educational instruction and educational experience because her point of perspective here is around the growth that happens here and how that impacts what we do around education, enrollment, and so forth.
Well, we don't want to wordsmith. I do wonder about the rock the boat language because I think, I don't remember whose language that came from, but if my memory is right, the concept behind this is that we don't want, just, okay, we've been going down this route with the ELA, now let's bring in something else, or let's bring in something else.
Right.
That's
But
our
it's
intention.
Right, so it's not whiplash, but it's not like we're afraid to change, that we're afraid to grow. And the don't rock the boat feels to me a little bit like afraid to change, afraid to grow, keep it the way it is. And I don't.
That's a good point.
Right, that's where
Continuity or
well, the
build on
progressive
momentum.
continuity we got there in our second bullet with the strategic plan. I think it's the same idea. Is what we're talking about here. Is we want to be moving forward, but we don't want just the fat of the day.
I feel like we could just turn this into a Venn diagram because there's so many things that fit in multiple categories. Speaking of wordsmithing, I'm going right to the visual.
I appreciate that. So, Jim, are you perhaps recommending remove the will not rock the boat and leaving here because there is some sense of that with the progressive continuity? Because we talk about the strategic plan of 4 Cs, which gets back to the connection to curriculum and instruction.
We could, you mean almost removing that whole line? That would be fine with me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's right.
Say change leaders utilize innovative strategy.
Right.
To both.
Yeah.
which would then seem very contradictory. We want you to be innovative, just not innovate us where we don't want to go. So maybe that's not contradictory. Maybe that's what we were saying.
Maybe that's what
two board members were saying. One was like, lead us forward. The other was like, but without changing what we like.
We don't want whiplash.
It was two people, so it's possible it's two
I
people.
think what we're saying is we don't want whiplash.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Just leave that statement up there reaches that point.
Yeah.
Which gets back to the working document.
We'll just keep working on it. Thank you, Mr. Blumberg, for that great idea.
Dinner table between my children.
I'll change it. Do we have anything, I think it would come under leadership and management about accountability? Someone who not only inspires and leads and is strategic, but holds people accountable, holds the board accountable, holds themselves accountable, and staff accountable. It's one thing to just say we're going to do all of this, but if we don't have the accountability piece, which is what we're expecting all of our teachers to do with all the data-driven decisions, we're saying you are responsible, and we are going to hold you to that, and how are we going to know?
I thought that's what you were saying. Right?
Yes, how are we going to know if you don't have that accountability piece in there? So somebody can figure out how to write all that, but that's
Tony's like, sure, you're right on that.
No, just don't rock the boat. You're right.
Because if you rock it, we will hold you accountable.
Sets high goals and holds all accountable for progress.
You are on it.
Yeah, I like the look in wordsmith.
Me too, right on the table.
And they're cheaper by the dozen today.
Lawyers?
Retainer.
You were talking about not rocking the boat. It's a good sentence from Montgomery County. Exemplify strategic leadership to execute and deploy the district's strategic plan. So that's saying we want to keep on that track, but it doesn't mean we're not going to have some tweaking to do.
Progressive continuity.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's a data and information-driven, persistent review of how do we improve where we're going. Are we making progress or are we not in this particular domain? And if we're not, what do we need to do different? Which is likely leadership.
Yeah, the academies. So this is a very strong profile.
Any other feedback? We don't have to. Because now it's a working document, so you don't have to feel pressure. It's ours for us to use.
What I can do,
Yeah, the candidates can request it.
what I'll do is I can go back and take your comments, and I haven't looked at this like from, now I kind of have a better sense because I wasn't at the last meeting.
Right.
So I kind of have a better sense of what you're looking for. If you, with your permission, I will try to tweak some of this so it's a little cleaner and just a little more sophisticated. And so,
Yes, make it be reflective of us, Tony.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I mean,
You felt what we were going for.
I mean, this is my superintendent too. My kids are in school. So now they're going to get my overtime.
Self-motivation.
And then I can post the draft on, and then, like I say, it's a working document. Thank you, Jonathan. And so as we kind of progress through this, like, I think we just kind of keep working on it and as the board sees fit. But at least we can, I think it'll be something that you'll be proud of when candidates send it out, which is important. Or when we send it to candidates, not when candidates send it out.
Yeah. I mean, they might do that too.
Right, that's true.
So this is draft.
Yeah, it was a draft, yes, it is a draft.
There's not one anywhere right now.
No.
Well, it is public.
Well, I mean, it's public, so a candidate could look it up right now.
I mean, this is basically the comments that were made. I mean, I think your last
It's literally
meeting-
her transcribing from our flip chart. That's what that is.
Yes.
Working document.
Back to Mr. Plummer. So I will not rush people to judgment. What I'll say is so you'll go back and work on our sophistication of this document.
Yes.
And then as board members mull it over when we're next with Allison, if people feel like at some point we want this to be a very sophisticated Houston-like document, then we can come back and have that conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Fletcher.
I'd like to offer a comment on the rubric score sheet that you folks developed. Not about the elements of it, but about the evaluative adjectives.
Is that this?
No.
No, what is that?
I'm looking at the one for, I guess, Durham County that's got, this is actual
Okay.
city. And the 5 areas to prompt evaluation are lack of evidence, poor, satisfactory, good, and excellent, which I think are not appropriate for what we're doing. Is that,
Agreed.
that if they're not satisfactory, we're not interviewing them, first of all. So the issue is what goes up from there in terms of fit, focus, and some different ideas that we need to reflect upon as we're ruminating over our 45-minute conversation with a candidate. So I'm not sure what they are, but this is inadequate for what we're trying to accomplish, I believe.
That's a good point.
You're looking at the Durham one.
So less.
Well, this is Asheville City, but
Okay,
they've got the same.
Both of them are Likert scales, and I think what you're
Okay.
saying is we don't actually want a Likert scale. We really,
No.
yeah.
Our objective
I
is
hear
to
you.
pick the best fit, just a combination of quality fit to what our working documents suggest are the most important things to us as a district.
I mean, while you're talking, I think there are several complicated ways I could think of one because I spent the morning doing a data deep dive. But there's several things. I mean, we could do like a Likert scale for what we believe the quality is that fits with this. And then you can also do a Likert for focus, because what that for those of us who are linear thinkers, Likert scales kind of help us narrow down, okay, this person really gets a 4. But the other piece for me is what are the buckets that we want people to fit in, right? Like qualifications, where they're. For me, I want to know what their focus areas are. We will be able to note that in an interview if their focus is on, I don't know, the 4 C's. So I think we can think about that.
If you take the broad category of experience of diversity, how are we calling it here? Experience with diverse populations. Then what would those buckets be?
That's what I mean. How do we design this?
Right, and it's not good or excellent.
No, it is not.
There's a different qualitative analysis to be done in assessing the fit and the potential effectiveness.
I guess my question is, what do we necessarily do with this kind of a tool? I mean, we all process.
And we're not obligated to use that.
Yeah.
That's just,
We all process very differently. I don't see us necessarily, summing a total, kind of like we've done in the superintendent's evaluations to try to get to, does he get a 90% raise,
That's what I'm worried about,
80%
using
raise,
a
or whatever.
Likert to do that.
Right, or we do.
I mean, it feels to me like, we start with X number of candidates. Round 1 is we kind of need to know from each of us, yes, definitely interview, possibly interview, definitely don't interview. Beyond that, I don't really need to know how you're going to rank things on any of these particular issues.
Oh, I didn't see this as I share with you. I saw this as I use this for my own rubric.
Possible. Okay. And then it doesn't matter what the scale is.
That's right.
Then
this is a reminder.
Yeah, that's my point. This is my reminder. This is
Yeah.
Monica's reminder sheet. You'll have yours, not a combination of a
As
negative
long as it's a
90.
reminder sheet, I don't really care what format it is. I can, we can adapt it to our own purposes. But But I think there would be some utility in having, however many candidates we have, sort of a three-bucket. Yes, maybe, no, because then when we get to deciding who we're going to interview, if we're all in a yes bucket, we don't need to spend time debating. That's a yes interview. If it's a maybe, those
I'll
are the
write
ones
that down. I don't believe you.
The point is the initial interview doesn't need to be where the big debate needs to happen.
I hear
For the
you.
first
Bring the
round
person in
is
for
what
the
you're
first
saying.
round. Yeah.
That makes sense.
To narrow from the first
That makes
round
sense.
to the finalist, that's when we need to have the deeper interviews, or the deeper debates among ourselves. But for the initial interview, that's when we need to consider ideas that we might not have thought of ourselves, and so that's why I want to make sure we cross a competence threshold. But beyond that, I want to try to keep my eyes open because, hey, Keith, you and I might not, on first glance, think that, yeah, this person fits in the category, but I want to be surprised. Yeah. So liberal first round.
Yeah, I think we'll do fine with the definites and the maybes.
So do I.
It's going to be if we have a definite and a not at all. Then I think we need to have a conversation because
Yeah.
the person who said definite on the same person that somebody else said, then what is it? What did we miss? Or what did someone misinterpret or whatever? But I think we still need to have
So that's why I do think we need a thing in front of us.
Yeah.
And maybe not. I mean, most of us actually are pretty good note takers, but I think there has, for me, right, if we interview 5 people, it's better if I'm a definite and you're a maybe or no, that we actually can go back and be like, oh yeah, this is why I was. So whatever that thing, I actually like the bucket idea versus lots of checkoffs. But we can
We have time to.
have time to think about what the scale will look like for us individually to rate. And I think you might have some creative ideas already at the table that folks are kind of
I
putting
think
out.
Jim's
There might be
exactly right,
options.
and that it is when you're deciding who you're going to interview, that is the most inclusive time. And so you'll all sit down on your own and review all the application materials, and then when we come back together, then you'll tell, each board member will say, like, who it is that they're interested in talking to. I mean, you're not picking a superintendent at that point, just based on paper, who you're interested and you would like to bring in and meet in person. And so generally, most of the time, you see a consensus. I mean, this person's going to, the majority of board members are going to want to talk to certain folks, and then there are going to be people that don't get any votes. And then kind of where, to Kathy's point, that middle ground is where if Kathy wants to talk to someone, and then 3 other board members don't, and also want to, but then some more don't, at that point, Kathy would then say, they'll be like, well, Kathy, why are you interested in this person? What did I miss? Christine would be like, well, here's what I saw and I didn't like. And and they'll say, well, this person said that, we didn't know what we were doing and that, there was something very wrong with us. And she would be like, well, no, when you look, and they were talking about equity and they said X, Y, Z. And so it's a conversation for the full board. And again, it's inclusive at that point. So usually we recommend that, if most board members want to talk to someone, that you would talk with them. And if there's someone that somebody is absolutely, they would have a lot of heartburn if you didn't talk to them, that's something that we are good at. We facilitate that whole process with the full board so that when you walk away, no one's, shaking their head. Everybody feels like they were heard and that they're going to get to talk to the people that legitimately that you should talk to.
Anything else for?
Some of the things that you get into that aren't on the working document, because it's just as you start talking about it, is how much is it important to know North Carolina law, North Carolina, the culture in the area, those types of things. They tend to come up once you start looking at applications. Is it somebody that's going to have to learn all of the issues in school law in North Carolina from the start, or is that important to you that they have some knowledge and it's coming in? And those are the things that just come up later as you get an application.
Yeah. And that's what our values, what is really the most important, and how confident are we? Because I truly do not believe that there's a candidate out there that's going to meet every single one of those. But I want to have confidence that whatever the area is that may not be their strong suit, they have the the ability to learn and whatever it is we need for them to learn to help our district go forward.
And delegate effectively.
I was about to say, yes, Mr. Fletcher. Know where
know
where your blind spots are. We got a strong team.
We do.
I mean, picking a superintendent is an art. I mean, it's not a science. I mean, I think that's kind of there's a really, to Jonathan's point, there's a lot of, this is the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more. I mean, there's the knowledge base, and then there's also the relationship and the fit. So, we have extensive, we believe in doing, the extensive interviewing, because you don't want to be like, oh, we never ask them this question, or I don't know where she or he stands on this point. So, there's a lot of ground to cover, but we want to make sure you're doing that. But with that said, and addressing this document again, it's like Kathy was saying, there's no way to check this off, and say, oh, this person meets this, so this is our superintendent. It has to be how they interact with you and knowledge and fit and that whole package.
You didn't call it knowledge, skills, and abilities, but you did add relationship, which I do like, because that's clearly important to us, but also important to our community. With their relationship. So, okay. I didn't see any heartburn yet, so it looks like so. Thank you very much for coming. And
if there's something you want to add to this, you have my email. I think everyone has my email, so shoot that to me. Because again, it's not consensus. So if someone wants it on there, if you think of something later on tonight or anytime before we come back for your selection meeting, I can work it into this draft.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thinking of categories like meets the expectation, exceeds the expectation.
You want a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale.
That's why I said a Likert scale.
Yeah.
No. I'm just.
You want to report
I'll
card.
go back and look at it, because I did something with a raise.
All right, so who's up? Kathy, you and Simone? Is that right? Both of you?
Yeah.
All right, welcome. We're ready.
What did I use for the descriptors?
You have your, it is time. You have your calendars in front of you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We're bringing back an item that we didn't get to the last time around. Your fault. Last time we had a work session. These are draft traditional, modified, and multi-track year-round calendars for the 1920 school year. We've already adopted 18-19. This is 1920. Just to confuse you.
Yes, just a little more.
Well, let me add, at the February 20th work session, we will likely bring the 1920 calendars for the early colleges. Remember, no.
You mean 1819?
1819 for the early colleges. Because you'll recall we don't adopt those until much later because we wait on the university academic calendar. So you're always sort of running two at the same time, one for the early colleges, it's for the next year, and then one for our other schools that's a year out.
And you're saying we're ahead of the community college and university systems in setting our calendar?
Yes. Yes.
Just
Okay. So a couple of reminders before we get into looking at the calendars. We went through a pretty extensive presentation last year on the calendar law, and just want to hit a couple of highlights before we start looking at calendars. So the latest revision to the calendar law was enacted in 2013-14 school year. It modified a little bit language on start date and end date. The start date has to be on the Monday closest to August 26th, and the end date no later than the Friday closest to June 11th. Those are parameters for start date and end date.
would you say that again? Start
The
date?
Monday closest to August 26th, and the end date no later than the Friday closest to June 11th.
State statute.
Yes. There are a couple of exceptions that don't ever apply to us, so I won't spend time on them. And a couple of other quick things. The calendar has to cover at least 9 calendar months, which all of our calendars do. The law also indicates that the calendar has to have either 185 days of instruction or 1,025 hours of instruction. The Wake County Public School System selects 1,025 hours of instruction. The primary reason here is that our multi-track year-round calendars schedule with the 4 tracks in and out all year long simply cannot support 185 days. We'd have 20 days where all 4 tracks are in session, and we can't do that with this capacity. So we go with 1,025 hours is the portion of the law that we meet. Now, we have traditionally maintained 180 days, which was the requirement prior to 13-14, no longer a requirement. It's just across 9 months, but the 1,025 is the piece that we have to hit. Minimum of 10 annual vacation days. We have to have the same number or equivalent number of holidays as it matches the State Personnel Commission for State Employees calendar. Can't have school on a Sunday. Veterans Day has to be a holiday for all personnel and students.
How many work days are required?
14 teacher work days are required. The employee calendar is 215 days.
For
10-month employees.
How many?
215. If you ever get your little paycheck, you see up there that it's 21.5 days that you're getting paid on every month. Times 10, 215. And the work days can be scheduled inside or outside of the student days, depending on how they fit and the kind of flexibility offered by the start and the end date.
Are there other North Carolina LEAs that do 185 days, and where would they fit in the extra 5 days? I mean, I'm not seeing a lot of give.
I'm not aware of anyone that does 185 days, but if they had I don't know how they would do that.
Yeah,
in some years, the last year in particular, I don't know how they would have done it.
Tight last year.
So one of the things that comes up with, we had it again this year where snow days pushed back, high school exams. I notice our second snow day isn't until January 21st. Our high school exams before that. Do you know when the high school exams are scheduled for that year, or are those not out yet? The first semester would end.
The end of quarter, wouldn't it?
And a quarter is the 17th, so probably.
Does it have the the end semester date on there?
Yeah.
Probably January 17th, at the end of quarter.
Yeah, end of quarter is the 17th, so it would be the week. So there's not likely, snow days may impact it, but you can't predict.
Snow days in early January would be tough to recover from.
Yeah.
As we know.
As usual, all right.
Kathy, can you clarify for me what it's, we just said 14 teacher work days. Is there any difference? What does the law say between when you can take a vacation day and when you have to work a day?
So the LEA and the school, through their school improvement planning process, can designate days as, we used to call them protected.
Right.
And what that means is that the school is reserving the date for teachers to not take annual leave in order to accomplish school tasks. However, that got muddied a few years ago when DPI changed language around protected days to being the 4 days that are at the end of every quarter, to say that they were protected, but not so that teachers couldn't take annual leave, but so that schools couldn't plan activities on the days after the end of a grading period, so that that time could be reserved for teachers to work on grades. So there's been some confusion.
Is that still in effect?
We do still have teacher work days at the end of every quarter, where we expect schools to allow their teachers to focus on their grades. I'm not sure that that's language in the law anymore.
So the statement that I sent to principals says that of the 14 teacher work days, a principal could require up to 11. the law just says 2 of them must be available for teachers to take leave. I don't know that all principals use all 11. That's just
Very few.
so there's an OSP
There's 14
day. So
days
there's
and
14
2 and
days.
11, 13, so it's...
So there's an OSP day that the district uses for staff development for PD.
Okay.
So that's an automatic kind of required day for teachers to attend. So that leaves 13. Of the 13, 2, we must leave for a teacher to take leave or do whatever the teacher wants. So the principal may require up to 11. Require meaning requiring the teacher to be there to participate in PD.
For the other 11.
For the other 11.
Does the principal decide that, or does the...
Typically, it's the school improvement team, typically, or the area. I don't know how they determine it.
The school improvement team. It should be the school improvement team. So starting first just with general questions about the calendar law, and then I was going to go sort of in reverse order, with traditional being last in terms of the drafts. Got modified on the calendar on the wall right now. The modified calendar, you will recall that we have 5 schools that follow the modified calendar. This is a calendar that a few of our schools started using 15, 20 years ago, and then it became illegal. You couldn't use it anymore, and the 5 schools that have been using it continue to use it. It is a calendar that, as you can see, the students will start at the end of July. They will be done by the end of May, and they go 9 weeks on, couple of weeks off. 9 weeks on, couple of weeks off. It allows the semester break to occur prior to winter break. It still provides a 7-week summer. 8 weeks summer.
8 weeks summer. Long summer.
And why are workdays not on the modified calendar?
They generally can determine to put their workdays. They have so much more flexibility that we allow the schools to look at how many they want prior to the first day of students, after the last day of students, and then they can actually schedule workdays during the 2-week breaks also. So a lot of times they will do that, and that's a flexibility that schools don't have, other schools with other calendars.
Typically, I work with compensation and the schools and determine their teacher workdays, but this is just the student instructional calendar, and on their calendar, they just do track out.
The statute says the required opening and closing dates shall not apply to any school that a local board designated as having a modified calendar for the 2003-2004 school year, or to any school that was a part of a planned program in 2003 school year for a system of modified calendar schools, so long as the school operates under a modified calendar. That's that.
15 years ago. Okay.
Grandfathering.
So the teacher work days for the modified calendar are all during the trackouts?
Typically, like I've worked on, not for 1920, but for 1819. So just a visual, they usually have 4 or 5 teacher work days prior to the first student day. They have 2, sometimes 3 during the first week of track out, and then the rest would probably fall a few days after students get out.
So this draft that we have has teacher on all of those.
No, that's teacher's track out. That's teacher track out, not the
Okay, just
teacher.
wanted to check.
Sorry, not teacher workday, sorry.
It was the same color code, but just different. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I'm sorry.
And there are no work days listed.
Not on this calendar.
Not on this calendar.
instructional calendar.
You know, 2 weeks for fall break, 2 weeks winter break, 2 weeks spring break.
Correct.
And then 8 weeks in the summer.
I love that.
You can thank Apex High School and Tom Dixon for creating that mess as they asked the board to allow them to start school earlier with transportation. And ultimately, they got up to exams before Christmas. The semesters were unbalanced. It was like 87 and 93.
Yeah.
And then the other high schools started saying, hey, we'd like to do that too. And then Southeast Raleigh was designed, and they kind of perfected the calendar. to move the start date way up. And that really upset people that we could be creative in how we use time and educate students and get exams in before Christmas.
To be punished for your innovation.
Yeah.
Well, I had
No good idea goes unpunished.
That's right.
And one senator asked me why we didn't have exams finished by Christmas, because her child wanted to start in Wake Tech in the next semester. So, the kids from Southeast Raleigh have that flexibility. They can enroll into a Wake Tech class because it aligns with their calendar.
I've been able to send quite a few emails to elected officials who are asking why we don't finish before.
And we have the solution.
Well, I just sent them the link to their statute.
Law.
I mean, there you go.
There it is. Any questions about the modified calendar? We'll get to some bigger questions around early release days and weather makeup after we look at all three. Let's take a look at the year-round calendar. You're familiar with there's always 3 tracks in, 1 track out. You'll notice that here in the orange, those are the only days that school is not in session for anyone.
For students.
Yeah, there's some of them might be teacher work days at the beginning or end of the year, yeah.
Just for historical, when did we do our first year-round school? What year?
90.
Kingswood, right?
Kingswood Elementary.
Kingswood, was it?
Something, I was going to say 93, so 94.
Was it 93, 94, or 94, 95?
Yes.
Well, everybody has a consensus on the school, but your question is the year.
One of those two. It's pretty to narrow that, though.
So Kingswood started as single track, and I think
Okay,
Lawrenceville
that don't count.
or Westlake was the first multi-track.
That's one.
So you'll note here, there's not a lot of flexibility in the multi-track year-round calendar in order to make sure that all of the days get in on all 4 tracks. We try to avoid tracking in and out in the middle of the week, but occasionally that will happen across some track here or there. So we try to make sure that we minimize it, but you'll see it happening in a few places where they have to track in and track out in the middle of the week. They do teacher work days prior to around the 4th of July. Before and after. They'll get the holiday for the 4th of July, but they may have teacher work days before and after.
We're so kind to teachers.
I know.
Clopening.
Jinx.
Clopening.
Monty, what are the... I think they're all ones.
Oh, it's just so the person could add across to make sure they're all 180 days. So you can ignore the number.
Okay.
It's just a 1 in every slot, so when you do Excel,
It'll add
you can
So
add
it will... Oh, okay.
That's all.
So I did have a question about, I'll save it till the end, about banked hours. And
We'll get to that shortly.
I'm writing it down, but Saturday school meeting.
Any questions about the multi-track year-round? We'll bring these back with additional information based on the latter part of our discussion. Again, we're still a couple meetings away from bringing it to action, probably. Take a look at traditional. Both of the calendars you just looked at are not bound by the calendar law with start and end dates, but this one is. We'll note that the first day of school is on August 26th. Monday closest to August 26th is August 26th. And then the Friday closest to June 11th, we're able to do it on actually June 11th. We could go to June 12th if we wanted to, but on to June 11th. In this calendar, you will note that we have designated the teacher work days. Something that's different this year. In 1920 in the proposal, you'll note that in September, on the 18th, you have a work day in the middle of the week that says W District. Our teachers have been asking for, and some of the central services staff have been looking for, an opportunity to have a day during the school year that we could conduct district-wide professional development, in addition to not just the week before, the one day before school starts, but something embedded during the school year. So we were looking at designating this workday in September as a day that departments across the district could hold professional development for counselors or media specialists or Common Core Math 1 teachers or elementary literacy, different kinds of things like that. Otherwise, we don't usually do those during the course of the school year, and when the work days are open like that, we don't have enough staff to get out to all of our schools, and so this provides sort of a focused opportunity to do that work. Haven't figured out where we're going to do it or any of that sort of stuff yet, but we're very interested in doing that, and so we talked to both teachers and principals about this idea. They're very much in favor of it, so that's what you're seeing there.
Good to do it toward the beginning of the year.
Yep.
The couple of other things to note, you will note that the winter break, the last day of school here, is a Friday, December 20th. And then we come back in on Thursday, January 2nd. It's an 8-day break. You will note that spring break in April, it's late this year. As a work day on the other side of spring break, that actually happens this year, the 18-19 year as well, I believe. But there's also a work day at the end of March, which is on a Friday, which is the day after the end of the quarter. So you've got a end of the quarter teacher work day, a week in school, and then spring break, which is a little choppy, but. There is some flexibility in this calendar to move workdays around if they are needed. You'll note that we have maintained in January and February 2 additional teacher workdays for long weekends that we've had in the past. Those 2 workdays could be moved to other places if you wanted them to. When the calendar committee did this work, if I'm not mistaken, Tamani, you can correct me, there was some attention paid to the number of work days that were available later in the school year for inclement weather.
That's correct.
And you have a work day after quarter 1, 2, and 3. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you still maintain that. Okay.
And technically 4 as well, because it's the day after last day of school.
Yeah, but since report cards go down on the 11th. But there's plenty to do, don't worry. So on this calendar, there's no early release.
I haven't put early release on any of those because I'd like to provide some feedback that we've been getting over the last 6 months from teachers and principals about early release days and how they're being implemented in schools and some potential changes moving forward. Are you ready for that? Okay.
Sounds like it.
So we've had a practice now for a number of years, probably about 6, 7 years, of early release days that we've scheduled on Fridays. An early release day is a 2.5-hour early release. They were scheduled on Friday after a previous period where we had weekly releases on a Wednesday. And then those releases stopped in that format. There was a recognition that teachers still wanted to have some early release days during the course of the school year. We settled on 6 for the entire calendar school year, 2.5 hours early. Multi-track year-round schools, you'll see it 8 times because it takes 8 days to cover all 4 tracks 6 times. And the feedback that we've been getting is that most schools would prefer to have a full work day over an early release day because during early release, even though the bell may ring 2.5 hours prior to dismissal, you are responsible for students until they are off that campus, and it really does limit the amount of time that you end up having for professional development or professional learning without keeping teachers much later on a Friday afternoon. So they would prefer to have full teacher work days, whether they're on Friday or not. We did experiment last year, maybe the year before, or maybe it's the next year, with a couple of early release days that we put in the middle of the week prior to a holiday break. You will recall this year that the Tuesday prior to the Thanksgiving break, where we were off on Wednesday and Thursday, that Tuesday was an early release day. And then for the winter break in December, the last day of school prior to the winter break was also an early release day. And you will recall we had a very short winter break this past year that we just came through. I think it was 7 days. And then the early release day. And the feedback from both teachers and administrators in schools was that they did not feel like that early release day lent itself in any way, shape, or form to professional learning for staff. Somebody, I can't remember which board member it was, had asked me what attendance rates looked like on those 2 days. It was about average, district average was between 15 and 16%. Our normal district average is around 4, maybe 5 on a high day. So, and high schools in particular, some of them were over 20%. So there was a high absentee rate, comparatively, triple what we normally see on those 2 early release days that were both right before a winter or holiday break.
Adjacent to holiday.
So they've asked, they would prefer that we not do those anymore either. Don't feel that they're getting the value out of those.
Right.
If the value of the time is for teachers to plan, be developed professionally, and work together, they're not getting that on either the Friday early release days or the ones that we had put before a holiday or the winter break. So that's why we haven't put any in here, because we wanted to get your thoughts on that feedback.
I'm going to go with what the teacher said.
Sorry, Stone.
I have a question about year-round, because I've heard from some of them that everything you're talking about, the teacher feedback and stuff, is traditional, and I would love to see them have full days of professional development. I think the quality will just increase. But what about our year-round schools? Because I think they're a different need. Because at least when you have an early release, you get 3 of your people.
3 tracks.
Unless it happens to be on a track out day, because you could get your people to come in that day and have everybody together. So what are the principals and the teachers in the year-rounds telling you?
So in that scenario, depending on what happens to those 6 early release days, it's not as simple a question as just, you could turn those 6 early release days into full teacher work days. But when you do that, depending on your start and your end date, you need to work to maintain your 1,025 hours within 9 months. But it may be 178 days or 177 days or something like that, which is not a problem with the calendar law. What that does, if you're going to go 177 days, is now you can put 3 work days in the multi-track year-round calendar that hit all tracks.
So we could have in a year-round calendar 3 work days within the year, still make the 1,025, but we would have fewer than 180 school days.
Yeah, that's correct.
But you'd have the whole staff there at once.
But you'd have full staff there at once.
That's correct.
So tell me the argument for why we wouldn't want to do that.
I'm just providing you options for discussion.
Well, yeah. What would be the downside?
I think that 3 or 4 years ago, when when the law first changed, and we looked at whether to go with 185 or 1,025, the board was clear that they wanted. Obviously, we had to do one or the other, so we maintained the 1,025 because we couldn't do the 185. But there was a sentiment to stay at the 180 days if we could. And we've been able to do that, and it's been really tight. But as we develop other needs in the district, and we're moving away from early release days, we still have maintained 1,025 hours of instruction. And I don't know that we would be putting all 6 early release days back as full teacher work days. There could be, because you lose 6 days, because you remember those 6 early release days count as student days, even though they're modified hours. So you could look at less than 180 days. Lots of districts have calendars with less than 180 days, so long as they meet the 1,025 hours of instruction. And they do something like ensure at least one teacher workday per month.
Is it fair, though, that the closer you get to the 1,025, and as opposed to having cushion, you could give up some of that cushion for when there's inclement weather days?
Fewer bank days.
Fewer banked hours.
so-
If you were trying to look at pros and cons.
Yeah, he's morphing us into the next discussion item.
Miss Happy was waiting for this. She wrote it down.
So to consider is shifting the use of early release days, perhaps eliminating them, and instead ensuring more full teacher work days during the calendar. That's sort of one level. And then how to implement that within the 1,025 hours can be done, whether it's using existing work days and moving them around, or increasing to make sure that we have at least one work day per month. And I can bring you options that show you that. I can bring you options that show you what it would look like, intentionally removing early release days and ensuring at least one teacher workday per month. I can bring you options that show you that. That's what I was probably thinking I'd have to do for the next board meeting. Which then moves us into knowing that we lose the hours on those 6 days, depending on how many of them we turn into work days or how many become student days. What we've done with schools for years now is we've asked them to count their hours to ensure that they have at least 3 days worth of hours beyond the 1,025. So all of our schools have at least 3 days of hours beyond 1,025. That's what allows us to have in our calendar 3 days worth of bank time.
For all schools?
For all schools. Every school, regardless of calendar, has enough hours to bank 3 days beyond 1,025.
But elementary are going to have significantly more?
Elementary have significantly more. Middle and high school are tighter because they have class changes. You can't count the minutes of class change within your instructional time, so they have more to subtract. So in order to implement no early release days and more teacher work days and stay within the 1,025, you then have to, that flips you then into where Mr. Blumberg was going. Do we want to still maintain 3 days worth of bank time? And then what does that mean for existing schedules in schools or Bell schedules? Or do you want to give up the 3 days worth of bank time to trade off for more work days? And just ensure, since you now have more work days, that there are more options for inclement weather makeup in the calendar.
So do I hear, this is called reflective listening, do I hear that on the traditional calendar, we could eliminate early release, we could give a minimum of one workday per month, bank 3 days, meet the 1,025 on a traditional
I can
calendar.
bring you an option that shows you that and what it would take to do that.
Okay.
And then variations on a theme.
Can we, on a year-round calendar, do we have to give the same number of work days to a traditional school as we do to a year-round school?
No.
No, as long as you meet the calendar law.
Do we generally do that?
No, there are no work days.
Not basically.
There aren't, they have just
We
the
generally don't do that.
We've not been able to embed teacher work days in a multi-track year-round calendar where all tracks are expected or able to be in just because of the flow of the calendar. Occasionally it might happen on a track in or a track out day, I think. But
Could we do a minimum of, could we do on a year-round calendar by eliminating if we eliminate their early release day, we only then can do 3 work days?
Well, we'd have to play with it a little bit to see, because you're eliminating 6 early release days, actually 8 in the multi-track year-round calendar.
Okay.
So that could turn into some that are student days and some that are work days. We'd have to rework that calendar a bit.
Okay.
We could look at 4 and 4, 4 that become student days and 4 that become work days. We just have to play with it.
I'd like to see what it looks like.
That's what I think.
All right, I'm going to ask some questions about makeup days.
Okay.
I'd say snow days, but all sorts of inclement weather. So on the traditional calendar in the yellow box, it has 3 dates, and then it says banked hours, 3 dates, and then banked hours, and a couple dates, and banked hours. Does that mean we're going to start using banked hours sooner? Like,
Okay, so if you're looking, yeah,
right
so
here.
the ones we have online eliminated those.
Oh, okay.
Because we didn't want to confuse you with what we've done in the past. So
All right.
that's not on this one.
Update mine. Okay. And then the next one was, and this was a question that was asked of me, was for year-round makeup days, they have their shortened Saturday with no lunch. Why do we have that for year-round, and why don't we see that on weather makeup days for traditional calendar? My assumption was transportation, but I didn't want to give an answer without.
So
Why on weather makeup days for traditional calendar do we not have what we
Shorter
see
days.
about the shorter days?
So primarily that has to do with maintaining the hours of instruction. Because it is middles and all high schools that are tightest on time. You can't have a high school go in for a partial day, and because you're handicapping them with the number of hours of instruction.
Okay.
And you have to run your schedule. Your transportation schedule needs. You're creating a 4th or a 5th tier when you do that.
Right.
3's enough.
I assumed those were those 2 things, but I wanted to ask because I knew this was coming up.
High schools and some of the middle schools need the hours, and because most of our multi-track year-rounds are elementary, you're really they're flush with hours.
So do our year-round middle schools struggle with that?
We check with them as well to make sure that they have enough hours.
Okay.
I think the other, and so the flip side of that, if you're multi-track year-round and why it's a half day or an early release on that Saturday is because it is often the 6th day of the week, depending on how the calendar looks. And so to go 6 full days is pretty hard. So,
1 day to recuperate and then go back.
if they're able to handle the hours, and it's the 6th day of the week, and you just can't predict when the weather's going to happen or which makeup day it's going to be for year round.
I mean, we
year round.
kind of figured that out, but yes.
Those
If
are
you
my questions.
figure that out, let us know, Ms. Fisher.
I think I've got my question answered. Thank you.
So just another quick reminder that for a couple of years now, the board has requested that we list makeup days for inclement weather in the order that they will be used. And so for all of the calendars, we used available work days and look at the calendar, and we try to list some first semester as well. We've had inclement weather in the past with tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that. So we'll list some first semester. We'll list some second semester as well. We don't generally include any language about banked hours until we're looking at second semester. And I want to say we've done it both ways. We've done it where banked hours were like the last thing we chose, and now banked hours are kind of somewhere in the middle. In particular, I believe that the current school year that we are in and we are having to use some time for inclement weather, the banked hours were strategically placed to occur prior to having to take days from spring break or something like that. So my question is, with regards to how we choose our inclement weather days, and if we continue to use bank time, do you still want bank time to be somewhere in the middle as a later option after days that are available, but prior to using dates that would impact scheduled days off and like time off, like spring break? Because you'll recall that one of the weather makeup days for traditional this year is actually June 11th. Because we actually used that because it was an available work day prior to using bank time, which is prior to any days that we'd have to use for take away spring break. Rocket science.
Yes. Then I'm so glad the rocket scientists understand. So,
I just comment. I think it's important to have the instructional days be the first step of recovery. Because we're losing instructional periods, instructional content, and banked hours don't make that up. So I think that's an important distinction between the two options from an academic and instructional and learning standpoint, as opposed to a checkbox at a state form. So I really think the makeup days are very important to our academic program.
Well, I was going to say I like them interspersed because it helps protect some of the work days. So I do like the way you have it listed here. That we're not just putting all the bank days at the end, as I think we did at one point.
Alternate?
No, I think the way it's listed is...
Alternate the bank days or alternate where the bank days are in the list?
No, I think...
Like you have it now.
Like you have it now.
Like you have it
Interspersed.
Interspersed is a good way to have it.
It's what Ms. Mahaffey was pointing to earlier. 3 days, then banked hours.
Yes, I like that.
At least on the traditional code.
Right.
Just briefly in response to Mr. Fletcher's comment, as we do more project-based learning, there's a lot of learning that takes place outside of the formal class day. And I mean, you can sort of expect that some work be done on projects otherwise. I did.
It depends on
the kids did.
I can share with them lots of ways to Skype your friends or FaceTime your friends while you're on holiday.
Yeah. So I don't feel like we have to be afraid that bank days are not appropriate.
I think we have to talk about it openly because, of course, I mean, we're having this conversation because parents email us and say, really, you have a makeup day the day after school ends? I mean, so there has to also be, to Mr. Fletcher's point, that is the sentiment of our parents, right? That we are making up days using banked hours which don't reflect any academic gains for their students. And so for me, there has to be some transparency in that conversation because I actually agree with you. That's possible, but we have to have the conversation.
Bank days than add a day at the end.
Oh, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
But I think we have to talk about it so that parents can actually hear this discussion that you just had. And we know that we can't just have it in the context of this calendar. We have to start talking about where we're moving to and how it actually relates to inclement weather when we have it. Because right now, as an old school parent, weather makeup day means I'm making up some hours that I missed. I call myself an old school parent because I'm halfway parenting as my mother did and halfway not. She FaceTimes her friends to do homework. My mother would have been like, silence.
Rarely would we have 11 missed days.
Right.
And this chart appears to have 11 days on it. So in the unfortunate circumstance of having 11 missed days, we would be forced into using the 12th as something, the 12th of June.
Yeah.
It's so unlikely that we would get there.
We did that one.
There are six work days after the middle of January.
Yes. Well, and again, I guess my point around the conversation, I just used the 12th as an example, but the other example is we had a makeup day after students took exams for the end of the quarter. Right. So that's the bigger issue that I was reflecting on. That was clearly an issue just a few weeks ago.
I want to make sure that I've got my marching orders here.
You're going to bring us back all those options that you mentioned.
Options for the calendars that eliminate early release days in favor of additional teacher work days with a goal of a minimum of 1 per month, maintaining, of course, all the aspects of the calendar law that need to stay in place, and then go ahead and, based on that, start identifying options for inclement weather days. And we will now be looking at still doing some in the fall semester, doing some after January, having the banked hours interspersed. But now the one thing that I did hear, I think, from Mr. Fletcher was, do we want the interspersing to include banked hours prior to adding a day to the end of the school year, which is not what was done in the current year that we're in now?
I think adding a day to the end of the school year is rarely effective.
Yeah,
That would be-
there's little instructional value in it.
And
So I'd
low
much rather
teacher
use banked
morale.
hours.
That would be-
It would mean that in this calendar year, we would have gone into
Just
banked
flip it.
hours earlier.
Flip it.
We would have gone into banked hours earlier. And of course, we want to be careful about how early we go into banked hours. So what we tried to do was have 3 days that were options prior to banked time. So if you look at the 1920 calendar and you go to January, you've got January 21st, February 18th, March 9th.
Classes for these.
And actually, I guess you could look at March 27th as 4 options prior to looking at bank time, 3 or 4 prior to bank time, and then looking at either the 12th of June or April 13th as options after that.
Yeah.
Well, you've got the 17th then as an option too, February 17th. And this list, you've got February 17 as the third option.
But that's a vacation day.
You've got it as the third option.
Yeah. We're looking at
Vacation.
Are you looking? Yeah.
We have
That's-
we have two
I'm sorry.
The yellow. I think that's this past year's dates, isn't it?
Well, they both say
This is
1920
what
calendar.
this committee
It matches
wanted
up.
to do, and I think their idea was just, instead of using all the bank hours at one time,
Right.
to figure out a way.
Okay.
So I don't think
Okay.
there's.
So you have something we didn't put on Assembly.
Oh,
Assembly doesn't have the yellow.
Okay.
okay.
So
We're up to the minute.
would you like that?
I've seen it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right.
I didn't realize you had it. All right, so we'll bring you the different versions that meet the calendar law and show some of these different options across all 3 of these calendars, and we'll spend some more time at the next work session.
Yeah, what's the next, the timing of this? When do you want us to give you the final okay?
Well, I think we'll bring it back on February 20th, and then we'll include the 18-19 for the early colleges, the application schools. So you'll have 2 sets of calendars, and then depending on where we are, then we can look for adopting sometime in March.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good for us.
That was easy. Any opportunity to do closed session?
Yes, there is.
Do you want a motion?
Jackie, you can get an HR.
Perfect.
Early night. Staff between 4 sessions.
Okay.
I move that we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-218.11 A1, A3, and A6, and 115C-319, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-218.11 A3.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will now go into closed session, and they're going to give Jackie. We will start with HR.